Good morning and welcome to Easter at St. Andrew. If you're joining us remotely from anywhere around the globe this morning, we hope you'll find in St. Andrew a congregation deeply committed to embracing people from every walk of life and from every point along the spiritual journey. Whoever you are, whatever you believe, you matter to us, and we welcome you into this remarkable faith community. Thanks for choosing to celebrate the resurrection of Christ with the St. Andrew community. May you experience the joy of Christ's resurrection today and always. Christ has risen.
A reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 16, verses 1 through 8. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid.
Welcome, friends, to Easter Sunday, the most inspiring and transcendent, yet most confusing and convoluted Christian holiday ever conceived. I think it's safe to say we all love Easter with its promise of new life and hope and God's unconquerable love, even in the face of death. But still, isn't it a little weird how over the centuries it's become this really odd mashup of Christian tradition and American consumerism? I mean, I love chocolate bunnies and baby chicks as much as the next guy. I'm down with Easter baskets and colored eggs, jelly beans and yellow peeps, Cadbury cream eggs and honey-baked hams. I'm even okay with grown adults dressing up in bunny costumes and hiding eggs in someone's backyard. But I'm just wondering what any of these things actually have to do with the resurrection of Jesus. It's almost as if centuries ago the Pope and Willy Wonka were at some crazy party, and sometime after midnight, one of them turned to the other and said, "You know, we really should work together sometime." But Easter is even more confusing than that, because apparently they stayed way too late at that party, and after working out all the consumer marketing details for Easter, they went straight to scheduling, and they brought in, of all people, an astronomer who had this crazy idea to move the date for Easter every year just to mess with us. It was like he said, "Hey, I've been thinking, instead of assigning Easter a fixed date on the calendar like Christmas, how about we mix it up a little bit and schedule it every year on, I don't know, maybe the first Sunday after the first full moon that follows the spring equinox." And maybe the Pope said, "That's brilliant. The people are going to love that." And so here we are, celebrating the resurrection of Christ on the first Sunday after the first full moon following the spring equinox, with our honey-baked hams warming in our ovens, while our kids are sugar buzzing on Jelly Bellies and yellow marshmallow peeps. It all makes perfect sense, doesn't it? But if you are wondering, that so-called party actually happened sometime in the 8th century. That's when the Christian church made the decision to celebrate the resurrection of Christ by adopting an ancient German springtime festival called Eostra. Eostra celebrated the rebirth of spring and fertility and reproduction. Its symbol was a rabbit, a cute little furry mammal with super impressive reproductive capabilities. Eostra became Easter, and its symbol, the rabbit, with its legendary procreative capacities, became, you guessed it, the Easter Bunny. But if the reproduction theme of Eostra sounds like a major departure from the resurrection theme of Easter, maybe it can at least be an entryway into understanding what we're really doing here on Easter, which is to boldly affirm that life prevails and love wins, that even though Jesus was crucified, Christ is alive, that even as we, like Jesus, contend daily with the powers of death in this world, God's purposes will not be defeated. The message of Easter is that, yes, death is real, but life doesn't end. It just changes. And so we can go on despite whatever bleak stuff life throws at us. We can go on believing that in the end, everything will be just as it should be. Everything is going to be okay. The Brazilian writer Fernando Sabino put it this way. In the end, he said, everything will be okay. If it's not okay, it's not yet the end. And that's the Easter message. Everything in the end will be okay. Not okay as in good enough or fine, but could be better, but okay as in all right. As in just as it should be. Everything in the end will be okay. But I wonder if that's the claim that actually makes Easter so unbelievable for some people. As hard as it can be for reasonable, scientifically minded, super smart people like you and me to believe that a dead man came back to life on Easter, I actually think it's even harder for people in the modern world, that is, to accept the claim that everything in the end will be all right. It's not that we don't want to believe that's true. We all want to believe that everything will be okay in the end. But maybe like the disciples of Jesus who witnessed firsthand the brutal crucifixion of their best friend on Good Friday, it can be hard for us to believe that it will all be okay in the end. Especially when we look at our own lives sometimes and it feels like we're losing our grip, or everything is falling apart, or our future feels uncertain and nothing seems like it will ever be okay again. Or maybe like those disciples who contended daily with the injustices of the Roman Empire, maybe we look at our world sometimes and all we see is the bad news of Good Friday everywhere. Wars in Gaza and Ukraine, ecological disasters, economic disparities, racism, hunger, poverty, disease. When we're really honest about what's going on in our world, sometimes it can be really hard to believe that everything is going to be all right in the end. It might even seem like the opposite is true, that everything's actually getting worse. In fact, if you belong to Generation Z, studies suggest you feel this kind of despair over life in the world more than any others. It's called existential anxiety. 6 in 10 Americans between the ages of 12 and 27 see issues today like climate change and AI, student debt. These are existential threats to their future. And to them, it doesn't feel like it's ever going to be all right in the end. That maybe it's getting worse. But I wonder if this is mostly caused by our modern worldview. That is, how we've been taught to see the world. For 400 years, ever since the scientific revolution, we've been taught that we live in a mechanistic universe, that everything we see and experience, including ourselves, is really just part of one big soulless machine, and that we and all the other individual parts exist for one purpose, which is to keep this big machine running. So we're just another cog and pulley, a gear, a lever in the system. We're just here to do our job, play our part, keep it all running until eventually we break down and then we get replaced by some other part. Maybe you don't quite see the world this way, and maybe you think it sounds cynical, but have you ever said, man, it feels like I've just been grinding away lately, or man, life can be such a grind? Have you ever said, sometimes when I'm at work or at school, I feel like just another cog in the machine? Has anyone ever asked you how you're doing and and you say, well, I'm just plugging away. I'm just cranking away. Have you ever noticed how we describe human emotion? We say things like, wow, that guy just flipped a gasket, or wow, she just blew a fuse, or man, I'm so exhausted, I'm feeling really gassed. Why do we refer to ourselves, conceive of ourselves as machinery? Maybe it's because we've been taught that we live in a mechanistic universe where there are no subjects, only objects or things, where there is no soul or spirit to things, only matter, molecules, atoms, where there is no meaningful purpose to matter beyond its sheer utility to the machine, and where matter just doesn't matter once it loses its utility in the system. I think this is how we mostly see our world, ourselves, as just a bunch of soulless parts in a spiritless machine where we live for a brief time and we play our part until we finally break down and pass on, and that's that. And if this worldview is true, it's a hopeless storyline for history. It's no wonder so many people today live without joy or hope or purpose, without any concern for the world's problems, without any real compassion for themselves or others. But Easter says it's not true. There's no denying that death is real. It'll happen for all of us, just as it happened for Jesus. But Easter says we are not objects in a machine. We are subjects in God's unfolding story. And Easter says there really is something enduring about us beyond our utility. Something that suggests that life doesn't end. It just changes. And we know this at the most basic biological level of existence. Our bodies are constantly undergoing change. While we are alive, our bodies never stop dying and renewing themselves. We are constantly changing, renewing, becoming more in this moment than we were in the last. In fact, right now, there are 35 to 40 trillion cells occupying your body. But those cells are not all the same cells you had yesterday. Over time, some of your cells they get old and tired. Others, they get damaged. Some self-destruct for reasons we can't even explain, but before they die, those cells replicate themselves. And it turns out our cells are highly efficient at creating their replacements. About 330 billion new cells every single day. Some cells work on a much shorter timeline than others. White cells, for example, replace themselves about every 3 days. Red blood cells about every 4 months. Skin cells about every 2 weeks. Bone cells about every 10 years. Brain cells, well, I'm sorry to say, brain cells do not regenerate at all. And fat cells, unfortunately, those stick around for 12 to 50 years, which confirms the scientific accuracy of that phrase, stubborn belly fat. But the truth here is undeniable. We are not unchanging, unchangeable objects. We are constantly dying, constantly becoming something new in every moment. And what Easter says is that this process of becoming something new, it never ends. Even after our bodily life in this world does. We're not just a bunch of soulless, spiritless objects in a machine. After all, something lives on. Something endures. Something becomes more until finally, someday, it becomes what it was always intended to be. And everything is all right. And we don't know how it works. All we know is that according to the Easter story, it requires some kind of dying, some kind of letting go. On the first Good Friday, a man was laid in a tomb. His name was Jesus. He was dead, and there was no question about that. He had died on a cross, his lifeless body laid in a tomb, a stone set in place over the opening of that tomb, and there was no question about any of it. But beyond those details, there are so many unanswered questions. Who rolled away the stone? And what happened to the body? And who's this sketchy guy in the white robe giving instructions like he owns the place? And why is everyone in the story so afraid and fearful and speechless and full of terror and amazement? And if Jesus really is alive, where is he? But it's a gift that these questions remain unanswered. Because Easter was never meant to be about gathering all the facts so that we could prove the bodily resurrection of Jesus 2,000 years ago. Easter is about how all of us, like Jesus, are moving from life to death to new life, becoming different and new in this life and in the next, until finally, someday, everything will be all right in God. Easter is about everything, really, it's going to be all right in the end, just as it was for Jesus. Easter is about how God's purpose is to make everything all right in the end. Someday all of this, all of us, will be as God intends it to be. That doesn't give us a free pass to just let things work themselves out of their own or to not get involved in solving the world's problems. In the Easter story, the disciples are given a mission. The stranger says, "Go and tell others that everything is going to be all right in the end." And have you ever noticed that sometimes just telling others that everything is going to be all right in the end actually has a way of helping make things all right in the moment? That's our mission too, to help make things right in this moment, in our time. We don't have to wait for God to make everything all right in the end. We can cooperate with God's purposes right now to make things right now. So, Easter asks each of us, how do you want to make the world right? What matters most to you? And are you willing to live now for it? Paul Kalanithe's book, When Breath Becomes Air, became a national bestseller. Kalanithi was a Stanford neurosurgeon. At the age of 36, he was diagnosed with metastatic lung cancer. He died a year later, but not before writing a moving account of his journey through illness and his quest to find meaning. Upon his diagnosis, he desperately wanted to know how much time he had left. As a scientist and physician, he was well versed in survival curves for various diseases, but now he was a patient. He demanded that his oncologist give him a straight answer about how much time he had left, but she refused. Whenever he pressed her for an answer, she always came back with the same response. She said, "I can't tell you a time. You've got to find what matters most to you and live for that." And those words changed his life. They took his mind off what he'd lost, his rising career, his health, his promising future. They kept him from waiting for the inevitable to happen. They emboldened him to forge a new future in the time he had left. And every day he reminded himself, find what matters most to you and live for that. As he began to figure out what mattered most to him, Kalanithi and his wife were discussing whether to have a baby together during his final months. And as they weighed the pros and cons, she wondered out loud if saying goodbye to a child would ultimately make his death more painful. And his response was beautiful. He said, "Wouldn't it be great if it did?" Takeaways for today: God's purposes will not be defeated. Something in all of us lives on. Find what matters most to you and live for that. And everything in the end will be all right.